Hi, and welcome to the M.A.P.S Media led Baltimore Innovation Week session using the Baltimore podcasting community for new businesses. I'm so glad that you guys are here. This is my very first Baltimore Innovation Week. I've never been a part. I know this is 10 years in, so I want to thank them for allowing M.A.P.S Media to have the opportunity to be a part of the Baltimore Innovation Week. I want to give some information, some quick housekeeping. So if you've never seen this before, this is in fact a YouTube stream. So you will see that there's a live chat there. If you have questions, you can put your questions in the chat. There's also a pinned comment at the very, very top. So if you see that at the end, if you want to pop on the screen and ask a question, you would be able to do that. So I also want to apologize for any duplications of email. So I sent an email and there was also an email that went out that has this YouTube stream on it. So if you know someone who's trying to find the link, it's in their email. It might have went in the spam or the junk folder, but I want to thank Celine for working with me because she has been absolutely amazing in that. So this is a quick, easy breezy, beautiful cover girl session. It's only 30 minutes. So we're going to get right to it and how you can utilize and really innovate with podcasting. So the podcast community here in Baltimore is growing. So it's something that we don't necessarily think about when we are thinking about innovation and with business, but it's a great way in order to do that. So let me give you some information about what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about how you can find these podcasts if you do not want to create a podcast yourself for your business. Also, how you can contact the podcast without PR, basic guest prep, and then using local podcasts to maximize your exposure locally, and then helping serve as a podcaster if you decide that you want to have a podcast for your business. Before we can do that, let me explain a little bit about me. So my name is Lisa Wingfield. I am the creator of M.A.P.S Media, which basically just stands for Minority Amplified Press Safeguard. We help the underheard and underrepresented voices be heard and be seen. We've helped numerous businesses here in Maryland and nationwide with their media. We've also helped them create a podcast if that's something that they want to do. There's lots of different ways that we've helped businesses reach millennials and Generation Z, which is the target demographic that we usually help with. Now, I know what you're thinking. Everybody has heard about podcasting. Everybody knows about podcasting, but what is it? What are podcasts? Podcast is basically just a audio stream. Some people will have a video component, but if it doesn't have an audio component, it's not technically a podcast. But why should you use podcasting? A lot of people don't realize that podcasting is one of the number one places to go in order to market. And it's free. It's free 99. It doesn't cost anything in most cases in order for you to be a guest or an expert on a podcast. So you want to be able to utilize those free resources if you have a smaller or new business in order to get yourself out there. Now, there may be a marketing fee or a speaker's fee, so you might want to ask the podcaster if they're reaching out to you or if you're reaching out to them. And podcasting, like I said, it's the number one place to market. It has a very big reach. So there's over 155 million Americans who have listened to a podcast. Now, there are a couple of genres of podcasts that are a little bit bigger as far as the reach. Now, business is not necessarily one of them, but it doesn't mean that you can't use different genres in order to market to a specific demographic, depending on what that is. And the very and most important piece about when we're talking about podcasting and marketing is that podcast listeners are more likely to buy things. So per Stitcher, which is one of the distributing sites for podcasts, 63% of mid-roll podcast listeners have brought a product that they've heard or advertised on a podcast. Now, what mid-roll means is just an ad that's read in the middle of a podcast. So you want to work smarter and not harder when it comes to marketing. You want to go to places where people are going to consume your content. Podcasts are one of them. It takes a special type of person to listen to a podcast because not only do you have to download the app, you have to download the podcast. So those individuals are usually a little bit more targeted with their time and what they're going to do. They are also less likely to skip. I don't know if you are on social media, but social media has become a place that advertisers realize it's a big place to sell. They have ads everywhere. And if you're anything like me, you're going to go skip, 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 skip. Podcasters aren't doing that. Podcast listeners aren't doing that. They are actually listening to the ads. So if you're not a guest and you actually have an ad played through a podcast, they're less likely to skip it because they don't want to miss a part of the actual podcast itself. So it's a great place to market. Now, podcasters, it's an interesting genre. They build a trust with their audience that a lot of other places don't have. They have a trust because their listeners are able to get that vulnerability. They are able to build a relationship. So podcasters establish that relationship with their listeners. So this is why it's important. If you do not want to create a podcast for your own business, you don't have to. You can let someone else do it for you. That trust is going to lead to more people finding you as an expert, building your social media, or selling your product, whatever that product may be. Now, there's also another reason why you would want to get on someone else's podcast and you want to utilize podcasts to market for your business. The number one reason is that it can be saved and it can be replayed. Dr. Avish Jones DeWeaver, who is an amazing woman, she's a media monetization expert. She explained this to me when I took one of her courses that podcasts can be archived in a way that the news can't. So podcasts can be played at any time and from any location, whereas the news is trusted. Like if you get on like the local news on ABC or WBAL, it's a trusted source, but it's hard to get on there. There's a very rigorous verification process and everyone can't get there. However, with podcasts, there's less middlemen and their listeners trust them. So if you're on their platform, they're more likely to buy and subscribe, and they can go back and listen to it at any time. So even a year down the road, they can still find your content. And then podcasts are also the number one marketing tool. They are an $800 million business. So big business have already recognized that this is the number one place to market. Unfortunately, smaller businesses have not jumped on the bandwagon just yet. So this is a great opportunity to really innovate your business that a lot of small entities have not done yet. They have not tapped into this space. Now, I know what you're thinking. Podcasting sounds amazing. It sounds amazing for business. Well, I could probably create my own, right? You can, but I want to give you some information that a lot of people don't tell you about podcasting. So the first part, a lot of things tend to trend. Right now, podcasting is trending. It is trending for business. You see a lot of businesses starting their own podcast. However, you don't necessarily have to do that in order to utilize podcasts to get what you want. Podcasting can be very time consuming. It takes time to plan it. It takes time to edit, record. If you are a small shop and you don't have a lot of employees, it may take more time to do that. I'm a parent and this year has traumatized me. So I'm going to make a quick reference about Common Core math. Creating a podcast specifically to sell one product or to get marketing for your business is like doing Common Core math. You are taking extra steps to do something that you don't have to. So you would basically be marketing your podcast in order to market your product, which makes no sense. You might as well just market your product. So if you're doing it specifically for that reason, it's too time consuming to do that. It's also extremely expensive. Now, there are free sites that you can utilize like Anchor if you wanted to create a podcast. However, it does cost a lot of money to market. So equipment marketing, not really worth it if you're just doing this to sell a specific product. And it isn't for everybody. If you're the type of person, we all have anxiety now with COVID, but if you're the type of person that if you're getting in an elevator and somebody's coming in, you're clicking close, 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 because you don't want the small talk, probably shouldn't be podcasting, because that's all that podcasting is. It's small talk turned into longer conversations. So this may not be for you, and that's fine. But there are ways that you can utilize podcasts in order to market your business without creating your own. So now that you kind of get that information, you're probably thinking, where do I find them, especially on a local level? The Baltimore Podcast Hub is growing. There's more and more Baltimore based or Maryland based podcasts that you can utilize, but it's harder if you don't know where to look. If you are a podcast listener, this is going to be fairly easy for you. One of the first places you want to look, and the easiest place to look, would be where you listen to podcasts. So if you listen to podcasts on Apple, that's where you're going to start. You're going to start looking for certain genres that fit into your product. So if you're a bakery and you sell baked goods, you may want to look into food or drink based podcasts. That makes sense because their listeners are going to be more likely to buy your product. So that's where you're going to want to look. Now, the downside is you cannot search regionally. It doesn't tell you where this podcast is located. So if you are a bakery in Baltimore, doesn't really make sense unless you ship to be on a podcast that's in California. One of the ways to really find that Baltimore Podcast Hub, which I don't know if you guys know this, I found this out myself, that May is actually Maryland Podcast Month. So right now, Maryland Podcast Month actually has a blog. So it's Maryland Podcast month.blogspot.com will actually give you a list of a bunch of different podcasts that are based right here in Maryland. So if you have that same bakery and you're based in Baltimore or somewhere in Maryland and you want to market to consumers directly in Maryland, that is a great place to start. Also, going on to social media. So sites like Facebook is good. There's a lot of groups, specific Baltimore-based podcast groups, Maryland-based podcast groups that you want to join. That way you can reach out to them. They have sites specifically for guests. So if you want to be a guest on a podcast, you can put in who you are, what you do, and the podcasters will come to you. Reddit is also a great place to go. Now, Reddit is a scary place. I'm just going to throw that out there. You're going to see a lot on Reddit, but they do have Maryland and Baltimore based podcast groups there that you can reach out directly to those podcasters to be on their show. Now, podcast directories is also a place you can go. Chartable is a great place to find podcasts, and so is podsearch.com. Now, this is great for genre. So if you're looking for, let's say you sell t-shirts and you're looking for a fashion podcast, it would be great for that. Now, as far as finding a local or regional podcast, not as much. So I just want you to be very careful when you're looking for Maryland specific podcasts. The best place to go is going to be social media. Facebook and Reddit are going to be the best places to find that. Also, Alignable is a great site. If podcasts get on there, you can see exactly where they actually are based out of. So that's also a great site in order to tap into that Baltimore hub, which is continuously growing. Now, I know what you're thinking, because I told you that the top genres aren't necessarily business genres. And you're like, how and who should I reach out to? Now, the genre itself doesn't matter as much when you're reaching out to podcasts as it does the demographic. So here's what I mean. If your demo are ages, males age 24 to 34, and let's say you sell electronics or you have like a tech-based brand, and that's the person that you're trying to reach, you're probably going to want to go to, let's say, a sports podcast, because they're going to have that heavily male-based listenership, which would buy your product, or you would maybe a great expert or guest on. So you would just, when you're reaching out to them, make sure that you pitch it in a way where it makes sense to their target audience and their topics of that particular podcast. If you don't have a big business for this, like a marketing team, and you don't have a PR team, that's fine too. You can contact a podcast without a PR team. You don't need one. And if you're creating a podcast for your business, you don't need a PR team. If you have one, God bless you. But if you don't, that's fine. The very first thing that you want to do is do research about that podcast. You want to know what topics they have, what's the quality, reviews. The best place for this is going to be like your Apples and Chartables. They'll show you all of this information. You also are going to want to know what their possible reach is. You can ask them, because there's no site that gives you that information. You can ask the podcaster directly and they would send that to you. Some of them do, some of them don't. So that's a great way to really build that rapport with the podcaster. And then a press kit. A lot of people who are businesses don't have an electronic press kit. If you don't know what that is, it's basically just a one pager about what you do, who you are. And you can find this a template on a site like Canva. It's great to have this because it's easy to send to a podcast producer, or even if you're trying to get on television, it's a great way to send it to a producer on television in order to really start to brand yourself to get into the media light. But social media, I've said this a couple times, is the best place to go. So this is the best way to really be introduced to a podcaster. If you're not on social media, you're going to want to get on social media. So you're going to want to follow them. And if you follow them, you will be able to send a message to them that's going to go into their primary box. If you don't follow them, there's unfortunately on Facebook and Instagram, there's two messaging boxes, one that goes directly to the person you're trying to reach and one that does not. So if they don't look in that folder very often, you won't be able to reach them if you're not followed to them. So make sure you follow them and try to engage them, and then they will follow you back. That's also a great way to build your followers if you are trying to build a footprint on social media with your business. And then if you don't want to talk on a podcast, that's fine. You still can market and utilize podcasts. There's a site called Podcorn where you can actually get a podcast host to read an ad for your business. You don't have to be anywhere near the podcast in order to do this. And one of the benefits of doing a site like this is that you can get them to send a pitch to you. So then you would determine which podcast best fits your product. And then you would make your price point for how much it would cost in order to market. Now, this is something that's free to use, but it is going to cost if you want to actually market on the podcast. Now, when it comes to contacting a podcast, you want to make sure you check yourself before you wreck yourself. And here's what I mean. So you want to know who your target consumer is. A lot of businesses, when they come to us, they don't necessarily know how to pinpoint that when it comes to media. So you do need to know who is listening to podcasts and what the trends are and who listens to what when you are reaching out. So I've had business owners who reached out to me and it didn't really make sense. The fit wasn't there. So you want to make sure you know that before you reach out. So let's say you have a religious based brand, you're probably going to want to stay away from a podcast that's a little bit on, let's say, the raunchier side of things, because it doesn't fit your brand, even if they have a very big audience. One of the best ways for you to be able to find that out is by going directly to Google. Google is going to be your friend. It's going to help you find the podcast that fits into your audience and your demographic. You can put asterisks in there, or you can even do a Boolean search, which means you're just adding and or in your search. So let's say you are trying to reach millennial audiences like I did here. You're going to put in millennial podcasts or podcast millennials, and it'll give you a list. The benefit of Google as well is that you're going to see which podcasts maybe pay for search engine optimization, which is basically them paying to boost where their listing is, which means they've taken some time in the quality of their podcast. And then also you're going to see if they have high domain authority, which is also something you're going to want to know, because that means that other people are talking about them. It means that their website is viewed quite frequently. And that's something you want to know if you are a business owner and you want to be a guest on a podcast. Now, if I'm being totally honest with you, podcasting is a lot like customer service. It's sometimes you go in the Home Depot and you can find someone, and sometimes you can't. That's kind of how podcasting is. Sometimes you get a great host and sometimes you don't. But just because they may not be the most experienced host, it doesn't mean they don't have an audience. So here's how you can really maximize your experience when you're on a podcast if you've never been a podcast guest before. The very first thing is you want to let us podcasters know that you are open to be interviewed. Please be a doorway and not a fence, meaning that if you're on social media, I should know how to contact you. If you have a website, I should be able to contact you very easily. One of the very first things that you can do if you want to utilize my audience and you want to become a guest on my audience with my audience is put in your bio on your social media for your business your contact information. So you can put booking information, interview inquiries right in your bio. That way I know how to contact you with your email. You make it very, very easy for me. And I know that you're open to be an expert or a guest on my podcast. Also, again, having a media kit. Anyone can have a media kit. You don't have to be a celebrity to have one. Anyone at all can have a media kit, and you should. It's a very good thing to have if you are a business. And even if you're thinking about starting a podcast for your business, please have a media kit. It's just a one pager or two pages, depending on how much information you have. And then know what your criteria and requirements are. So, what I mean by that is know what you don't want them to ask. There are certain things that you may not want to talk about. There may be like certain things that you are not comfortable with. If you don't like profanity, those are things that you're going to want to know and tell the podcaster or the podcast up front. Always know what those requirements are, and also have requirements of the podcast that you're going to go on. So if they have under a certain amount of downloads, know that I don't want that. It's not going to help my business. So just knowing what those are. I do want to let you know that the average podcast download is about 150 downloads per episode, which a lot of people don't know that. They think it's in the tens of thousands, and it doesn't necessarily have to be. So you do need to be very careful with your expectations with podcasts. Now, when you're going to podcast, you also, again, you may get a great one, you may not. So you always want to ask for a podcast release form. So the podcast release form is going to tell you who can share it, when they can share it, how long they can share it, where they can share it. A lot of podcasts don't do this, but this helps you control your brand. Your brand is your baby, so you want to make sure you control it at all time and know what the meaning for the interview is. I couldn't tell you how many people have come on as a guest, business owners that do not know why they're there. So if your goal is to be seen as an expert, make sure that the interview is not about your background, but it is about a topic. You always need to know why you're being interviewed so that you can get your message across. If you're going to be utilizing the space, time is money. Make sure you maximize that. And if you don't want to be the spokesperson and you have someone who's a better spokesperson for your company, use them. It's okay that it's not you. Just utilize someone who knows what they're talking about and is able to engage in those types of conversations, and always have a time frame. Again, time is money. So if they say 30 minutes, hold them to 30 minutes. And then to maximize your exposure locally, one of the things that people don't do when they get on podcasts, you have to share it. But one of the ways to really make sure your brand is seen, make sure that they put your logo and your business on everything that they're putting out as far as social media. This will help you grow your brand and your followership, because their followers become your followers. Their audience becomes your audience. And you also want to search some regional hashtags. You can just go on like regionalhashtags.com, which will show you what is trending here in Maryland. And those are the hashtags that you're going to tell the podcaster, hey, can you use these when you brand? Hey, can you use these hashtags? Or if you have your own hashtag, make sure it's short, because people don't use long hashtags, and that it's easy to use. That way it'll start to really brand your business, and it's something that will continue to grow. Also, you get free content. So you'll be able to use those same snippets from that audio or video on your social media, on your website. So this is also a great way to use Baltimore podcasts or just podcasts in general in order to grow your business. And if you decide after everything I just said, like, hey, I think I like being a guest, but I still have some interest in creating my own podcast for my business, I want you to know that's fine. But just always add value and know exactly why you want the podcast for your business. Podcasting takes a long time. So it takes a long time to grow. So when you do set it up, set your podcast up for success. That means you don't want a fly by night podcast. Make sure that for your business, This podcast is another revenue stream, and you look at it as another revenue stream. So when you're making things like your cover art, which is the very first thing that a person is going to see, it's like a billboard for your podcast. You spend time in that because that is the very first thing that they're going to see. Make sure it matches your color scheme, your brand, so that it always comes back to what you are doing. That's like the guy, I forget his name, that has the chicken wings and he has the hot sauce, and he made a whole web series. You can do that, but just like him, he took it and he made sure that it was its own entity, and he looked at it as another revenue stream, and now that's his primary revenue stream. And then you have to have the proper sound equipment. You don't need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a mic. You really don't, but you do want to have at least a mic. You want the sound quality. If you don't have one, you can go somewhere that does. There's a couple places here in Maryland locally where you can use the studio, because you can get audio fatigue. If it doesn't sound good, people won't listen to it, and you're not going to grow your listeners. And then you want to know what it is that you're selling. Are you selling a product, or is your goal to make yourself an expert in your industry? Because those are two totally different podcasts, and you want to make sure that you know exactly why you want it. Always make sure you know, if you're going to have guests and you're serving the Baltimore community in your podcast, make sure you know what's in it for the guests. Always think of what's in it for them. So always add value when you're reaching out. This will help increase the amount of people that actually will be guests on your podcast. And then know who you're talking to. Do the research, find out who your guest is, what's their brand, what's their style. You don't want to change your style to match them, but you do want to be able to match the pace of your guests so that it is not an awkward conversation. So make sure you've done some research on who they are, and then prepare. If you're not as comfortable with doing media, that's fine too. But send the guests the questions up front. That way, if they look good, you look good. Like at this point, you're not trying to be Wendy Williams and catch people. So you want to make sure that your guest looks good, because if they look good, you will look good too. So when you're interviewing people, keep that in mind. And then also make sure you ask them to share it, because the only way their guests an audience can be your audience is if they actually share the content, and everybody is not going to do that. So make sure you ask them that. Now, I want to thank you guys for joining me. I know some of you guys joined in a little bit late. I am going to send this information out. I have everybody's email and contact information, so I'm going to send that information out. If you have questions for me, you can send it to me directly. My name is Lisa Wingfield, and my email will be included in the email that I send you, but that's just lwingfield@millennials.us. So if you are interested in potentially creating a podcast yourself for your business, you can reach out to me. Or if you are still interested in how I can really create and get on other people's podcasts and platforms, you can also reach out to me. If at this point, if you have any questions, you can put it in the live chat, or if you would like to pop on, there is a link in the chat that I've pinned there that gives you the opportunity to actually pop on the screen. I do have, I think it's one person that actually is in the queue. So if you want to be on screen, just let me know. I think it's Alicia. If you have a question, just let me know. So if you have a question directly about podcasting for business and how to get that started, or any questions at all, you can ask those at this time. All right. So it looks like we don't have any questions about podcasting. So what I'll do is, like I said, I'll send this out to anyone who has questions about that. This is a very fast overview. We went through it really quickly because this is a very easy topic. But if you do want to do it or have any questions later for me, you can certainly do that. Now you can go to the vending machine if you're at work, or if you are home and you need a restroom break, you can do that. Thank you again for listening in to me today. I know we went through this very, very fast. So, again, you'll be looking out for that email. And if you have any questions or think of anything later, please let me know. Thank you so much again for joining. And my name is Lisa Wingfield with M.A.P.S Media. Have a great day.